My name is Grace Whitmore, and I am 70 years old. For nearly 3 decades, the world has believed a lie about me and the 4 women who were once my family. In September of 1979, Havenwood woke up to find 5 nuns missing. Storm clouds swallowed the convent that night, and by morning the whispers had begun. They drowned in the river. They ran away with men. God struck them down. But none of those stories were true. I am alive, and so were the others, for a time. We did not vanish by chance. We did not leave because of love or rebellion. We left because the very place that was meant to protect us became the darkest prison we had ever known. For years I told myself I would take this secret to the grave, that silence was safer than truth. But silence has its own way of rotting a soul from the inside. Every night I wake with the same memory, the sound of Sarah's sobs echoing in the stone halls, the mark of his hand across her cheek, the way the rain beat against the convent windows as we planned our escape. I tried to forget. I tried to bury it under gardening, knitting, Sunday church visits, and the quiet rituals of an old woman's life, but I cannot. Not anymore. The truth is heavier now than it was then, pressing on my chest, begging to be spoken aloud. I do not have many years left, but before I leave this world, I must tell you why 5 women climbed over those convent walls in the dead of night, why some of us never made it home, and why the devil himself wore a holy cloth. And tonight, as I sit here in my small living room with the curtains drawn tight, I hear a knock on the door. Slow, deliberate, the kind that chills your bones. No one should know I live here. I was only 16 when I first walked through the convent gates. My hair was still long then, braided down my back, and my eyes were filled with a kind of faith that only the young can carry. Havenwood was a small town, no more than 3 streets and a single diner. People there trusted what they could see, and the convent on the hill was as solid and holy as stone could be. To them, it was untouchable. Inside, life was strict but simple. The bells woke us at 5. We prayed until our knees ached, sang hymns that lifted through the rafters, and worked the garden until our hands blistered. I liked the garden best, kneeling in the dirt, tending to the carrots and tomatoes. It made me feel close to God, as though every seed I pressed into the earth was a prayer he could answer. There were 5 of us in total. Martha, the eldest, with wrinkled hands and a sharp tongue that hid a tender heart. Eleanor, the thinker, who could quote the scriptures like she had written them herself. Joy, whose laugh could fill a room. And Sarah, sweet, timid Sarah, only 19, who often clung to me as if I were her older sister. We were watched over by Mother Agnes, a woman who carried both discipline and kindness in equal measure. She was firm, but she loved us in her own way. In those early years, I believed I had found my purpose. My mother used to say I was born with a quiet soul, that I saw more than I spoke, and maybe that's why I was the first to notice when the air began to change. It started small, a glance that lingered too long, a question in confession that felt like it didn't belong. His name was Father Michael, the new priest, tall, broad-shouldered, his voice deep enough to command silence in a crowded church. The town adored him. The children followed him like a parade. To the parishioners, he was God's chosen shepherd. But to me, he was a shadow creeping in where light should be. One evening, I passed the library and saw something that made my stomach twist. Sarah was pinned between the shelves and his body, his hand gripping her wrist. Her eyes, wide, wet, terrified, met mine for only a second before he noticed me standing there. His smile never faltered, but I knew. I knew then that something holy had been defiled. That night, I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling as rain tapped against the glass. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I whispered a prayer, not for myself, but for Sarah. And as I whispered, I realized something that stole what was left of my peace. If Father Michael was the wolf, then we were sheep trapped in the pen, with no shepherd to save us. And worse, no one outside those walls would ever believe us. I tried to tell myself what I saw in the library had been a mistake. Maybe I had misunderstood. But the bruise blooming on Sarah's wrist the next morning told me otherwise. She kept tugging at her sleeve, hiding it, her eyes darting like a hunted animal's. I couldn't stay quiet. After evening prayers, I found Sister Eleanor alone in the chapel. She was kneeling, whispering verses under her breath, her face pale in the candlelight. I hesitated, but then the words tumbled out of me. "Eleanor, something's happening. With Father Michael." She froze, the beads of her rosary clenched tight in her hand. For a long moment she didn't speak. Then she whispered, "I've seen it too." Her admission sent a chill through me. It meant I wasn't imagining things, but it also meant the danger was real. "He corners Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "I saw it. I think he—" "Don't say it." Eleanor cut me off sharply, her voice trembling. She pressed a hand to her forehead, as though the truth itself was too heavy to hear aloud. For days, she avoided me. She walked with her eyes down, lips pressed shut, carrying silence like a cloak. I thought she had abandoned me, that fear had swallowed her whole. But one night, as we scrubbed the dining hall floors, she leaned close and whispered, "Grace, if we speak of this, no one will believe us. Not against a priest, not ever." Her words fell like stones inside me. I knew she was right. In Havenwood, a priest's word was law. Ours meant nothing. But Eleanor wasn't finished. She looked me dead in the eyes and whispered a single word that made my skin prickle. Proof. It was the first crack in the silence that bound us. The first sign that maybe, just maybe, we could fight back. But what neither of us knew was how quickly Father Michael would sense our unease, and how mercilessly he would tighten his grip. Sarah was only 19, barely more than a child. And yet, in the weeks that followed, I watched the light drain from her like water from a cracked cup. She stopped laughing. She stopped singing during morning hymns. Her cheeks grew hollow, her hands shook when she held her rosary. At night, I sometimes found her curled in the hallway, clutching her habit like it could shield her from the world. One evening, as I tended the garden, she came to me. Her eyes were swollen, her lips trembling. She dropped to her knees in the dirt and whispered, He says if I tell anyone, I'll burn in hell." Her words ripped through me. No scripture, no prayer I'd ever learned could answer that kind of cruelty. I held her shoulders, trying to steady her trembling. "Sarah, listen to me," I said. "That is not God speaking. That's him. Just him." But she only shook her head, tears cutting paths through the dust on her cheeks. "He wears the cloth, Grace. Who will they believe? Me or him?" I had no answer, and that silence, my silence, felt like a betrayal. Meanwhile, Father Michael's visits grew bolder. No longer content with stolen glances, he began summoning sisters one by one under the guise of spiritual counsel. He would call Eleanor to the library, Joy to the sacristy, even me to the confessional, where his questions slithered past the boundaries of faith. "Do you ever feel tempted, Sister Grace?" he asked once, his voice low, a smirk curling at the edge of his lips. I gripped the wood of the kneeler until my knuckles turned white. I said nothing. And in that silence, I realized something that chilled me. He was testing us, pushing to see how far he could go. And every moment we stayed quiet, he grew stronger. That night, after Sarah collapsed in sobs on my shoulder, I whispered a vow to myself. I will not let him destroy us. I will not let him win. But I didn't yet understand the cost of defiance, or how far he was willing to go to keep his secrets buried. Sleep no longer came to me easily. Every creak of the convent floorboards jolted me awake. Every shadow stretching across the wall felt like his. But fear has a way of sharpening a soul. And so I began to watch. I kept a small notebook hidden beneath the loose stone near my bed. In it I wrote dates, times, details, when he came, who he called, what I overheard. It was dangerous. If he ever found it, it would be the end of me. But Eleanor was right. Without proof, our words were dust in the wind. It didn't take long for the pages to fill. July 3rd, 9:15 p.m. Sarah called to confessional, returns with red eyes. July 8th, 7 p.m. Joy summoned to sacristy, avoids eye contact all night. July 11th, midnight. Eleanor in library with him nearly an hour. Leaves pale, trembling. Each entry felt like carving his sins into stone. But even as I wrote, I wondered if it would matter. Who would dare to believe a handful of frightened women over a priest with the town at his feet? Meanwhile, the sisters drew closer to one another, though not in laughter as before. Our bond now was forged in silence, in whispered prayers and hurried glances. Martha began walking Sarah to her room every night. Joy insisted on never letting anyone be alone in the hallways. Eleanor studied Father Michael's movements with a cold, calculating gaze, as if memorizing a predator's habits. But he noticed us too.
One afternoon, as I scrubbed the chapel floor, his shadow fell across me. I froze, the bristles of the brush stiff in my hand. He leaned down, his voice just above a whisper. "You watch too much, Sister Grace." The words slithered into my ear like smoke, and then, as quickly as he came, he straightened, smiled, and walked away, leaving me trembling, my heart pounding like a war drum.
That was the moment I knew he had seen through me. He knew I was no longer prey, but a witness, and in his eyes that made me dangerous. The notebook beneath my mattress was no longer enough, each page filled with dates and whispered horrors. But still Sarah trembled, joy withered. Eleanor grew colder by the day. The evil inside those stone walls was growing, feeding off our silence. One morning, after yet another sleepless night, I knew what I had to do. I would take the risk. I would go beyond the convent walls. I waited until Mother Agnes gave me permission to fetch special medicine for her illness from the town's apothecary. My heart pounded as I walked down the hill, each step feeling like treason. The townsfolk waved kindly as I passed. They saw me as holy, untouchable. If only they knew the truth I carried like a burning coal in my chest. Instead of the apothecary, I turned toward the bishop's office. The building loomed tall, with stained glass windows that caught the sun like jewels. Inside, the air was thick with incense and authority. I sat for 3 hours on a wooden bench, my palms sweating through my habit, rehearsing my words. When they finally called me in, the bishop sat behind a heavy desk, his gold cross gleaming. His eyes were kind but distant, the way a man looks at someone already beneath him. I told him everything. About Sarah's bruises, about Joy's tears, about the questions, the touches, the way Father Michael had turned our sanctuary into a hunting ground. My voice shook, but I laid my notebook on the desk like an offering.
When I finished, silence stretched between us. He leaned back, sighing deeply. "Sister Grace," he said, "these are very serious accusations. Father Michael is an exemplary servant of God. Are you absolutely certain?"
My stomach dropped. He didn't see the truth. I saw doubt, hesitation, fear of scandal. I wanted to scream, "Yes, I am certain. We are being devoured alive while you hide behind ceremony." But all I managed was a trembling, "Yes, I am certain."
He folded his hands. "I will investigate, but you must remain silent. For the sake of the church, for the sake of faith."
I left his office with my legs shaking. I had carried our secret beyond the walls at last, only to feel it sink deeper into shadow.
And 2 nights later, when Father Michael cornered Eleanor with a triumphant smile, he whispered a sentence that made my blood run cold. "The bishop sends his regards."
I thought I had done the right thing. I thought the bishop, with his grand cross and solemn vows, would protect us. But the truth? He handed me to the wolf. 2 nights after my visit, Father Michael came to the convent after hours, his footsteps echoing down the stone corridors. He went straight to Eleanor. I saw her leave the library nearly an hour later, her face drained of colour, lips trembling, eyes avoiding mine.
"He knew, Grace. He knew everything. The bishop told him."
My heart stopped. All the air seemed to leave the room. The man I had begged for protection had betrayed me, betrayed us, and armed Father Michael with the knowledge that one of his sheep dared to cry wolf. The next morning, Mother Agnes summoned me. Father Michael stood beside her, his hands folded, his eyes glittering with mock sympathy. She read aloud a letter from the bishop. "Sister Grace has shown disobedience, false accusations, and troubling signs of instability. Immediate transfer is recommended to a remote convent in Montana." Montana, thousands of miles away, alone, silenced. I wanted to scream the truth. I wanted to tear the letter to shreds and throw it in his smug face. But I saw how Mother Agnes looked at him, with trust, with loyalty. My words would mean nothing. That night, Eleanor came to my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, her shoulders shaking. "Grace, they'll take you away. And if they do, we'll never survive this." Her eyes were filled with guilt, but beneath it was something harder. Determination. In that moment, I understood what had to be done. If the church would not save us, if the walls themselves had become our prison, then we would save ourselves. We would flee. But fleeing a convent was no small sin. It meant abandoning vows, our identities, our very lives. To the world, we would become traitors, ghosts, lost souls. And yet, As I looked into Eleanor's weary eyes, I whispered the only words that made sense. Then we disappeared together. We could not plan in the open. Every hallway seemed to carry sound. Every prayer felt watched. So we gathered in the cellar, among crates of potatoes and jars of preserved peaches, the air thick with dust and damp stone. It was there, in the flicker of a single lantern, that 5 frightened women whispered the word that had never before been spoken in those walls: escape. Sarah sat huddled in the corner, knees pulled to her chest, rocking silently. Joy twisted her rosary so hard it snapped, beads scattering across the floor. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she traced the outline of a plan in the dust. And Martha, old and weary, closed her eyes before saying, "For 60 years I believed these walls would be my grave, but I will not die here under the shadow of a monster." The weight of her words silenced us all. But even with resolve, how could 5 women slip past gates guarded by iron and walls crowned with broken glass? We had no money, no allies, nowhere to run. The answer came from the most unexpected place: Mr. Miller, the vegetable supplier, a widower with calloused hands and sorrow behind his eyes. He had delivered produce to us for years, speaking little more than polite greetings. But one morning, as I helped him unload crates, he studied me for a moment. "You don't look well, Sister Grace," he said softly. "Like you're carrying something too heavy." I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired."
He hesitated. Then almost in a whisper he added, "My daughter. She joined a convent up north. Something happened to her, with a priest. By the time she told me, it was too late."
My breath caught. His pain was our mirror. And in that moment I realized, this man understood. He would believe us when no one else dared. The following weeks we slipped him folded notes hidden inside baskets of carrots and heads of lettuce. He replied in the same way, his rough handwriting simple and direct. "There is a section of the back wall where the stones are weak. A tree grows close. I will leave a rope ladder there." For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. But hope is dangerous in a place like that, because hope can make you careless. And Father Michael was already watching us far too closely. Mr. Miller's notes became our lifeline. Hidden in baskets of potatoes, tucked beneath bundles of herbs, each message felt like a key turning inside a locked door. "The oak tree is strong enough to hold your weight. I will wait on the road with my truck. The best time is when the rain falls hard. The guards at the gate never check then." Every word brought both hope and terror. Hope, because freedom now had a shape. Terror, because if Father Michael discovered even a whisper of our plan, our lives would end inside those stone walls. We met in the cellar every chance we had, our voices no more than breaths. Eleanor kept track of details, which nights the weather grew restless, which hours Father Michael stayed late. Martha rationed supplies, bread wrapped in cloth, a flask of water, matches in a tin. Joy, once radiant, now gaunt and quiet, clung to the thought of escape, as if it were her last tether to sanity. And Sarah, poor Sarah, she spoke less each day, but when she did, it was always the same broken plea. "Please don't leave me behind." Yet the more we planned, the more Father Michael seemed to circle us. He lingered longer in the halls. His hand brushed too close on my shoulder during prayers. His voice carried taunts that only I seemed to hear. One night he cornered me in the chapel after Vespers. The candles were nearly burnt out, shadows stretching long across the pews. He leaned close, his breath hot against my ear. "You've been restless, Sister Grace," he murmured, whispering with the others. "Do you think I don't see? Do you think God doesn't tell me what you plot?" My knees went weak, but I forced myself to meet his gaze. I said nothing. Silence was the only shield I had left. He smiled then, a slow, cruel curl of the lips. "Run if you wish, but remember, God sees everything, and so do I." When he left, the candles flickered, and I collapsed into the pew, clutching the wood until splinters dug into my palms. For the first time, I wondered if he already knew. And as thunder rumbled in the distance, I realized something. The storm was coming faster than we had planned. The storm rolled in like the wrath of God. Wind howled against the convent walls, rattling shutters and bending trees to the ground. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the stone towers in ghostly flashes. It was the kind of night when no one dared to leave their bed. For us, It was the only chance we had left. We gathered in the cellar, hearts pounding, habits clutched tight against our trembling bodies. Martha pressed a small bundle of bread and water into my hands. Eleanor carried the rope ladder Mr. Miller had hidden for us. Joy kissed her broken rosary, whispering a prayer with cracked lips. Sarah, she could barely stand, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. "We do this together," I told them, though my own knees threatened to give way. "No one gets left behind." The storm drowned out our footsteps as we crept through the halls. Every shadow felt alive, every door a possible trap. My heart hammered so loud I was certain Father Michael could hear it wherever he was. At last, we reached the rear wall. The oak tree loomed tall, its branches thrashing in the wind. Lightning lit the crumbling stones, jagged glass glinting at the top. Beyond, somewhere down the road, Mr. Miller's truck waited like salvation. Eleanor fixed the rope ladder to the tree, her fingers fumbling with urgency. "Go, Grace, you first." I gripped the ladder, rain soaking my sleeves, and pulled myself upward. The glass cut at my habit, slicing threads. My hands burned, my breath came ragged. But at last I swung one leg over the top. Lightning flashed, and for a single heartbeat I saw the road below, dark and empty. Freedom, quickly. Sarah began to climb, her trembling nearly shaking the ladder loose. Martha steadied her from below, whispering encouragement. Joy followed, her rosary beads clinking like bones. Eleanor, always last, kept watch at the base. But just as Sarah reached the top beside me, the sound that froze our blood cut through the storm. A voice, cold, mocking, far too close. "Going somewhere, sisters?" And there he was, Father Michael, standing in the shadows, lightning flashing across his face. Father Michael's voice cut through the rain like a blade. "Leaving so soon? I thought you were obedient." My heart froze, pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I clutched the rope ladder as Sarah whimpered behind me, her small hands gripping my sleeve. Joy shivered, her knuckles white against the rope. Eleanor's eyes blazed with silent calculation, and Martha's face, lined with 60 years of service, was a mask of grim determination. "I warned you," he said, stepping closer, his wet robes clinging to his frame. "God sees everything. And so do I." Lightning illuminated the wet stones, the jagged glass glinting like shards of ice above us. I could feel his eyes on us, measuring, predatory, daring us to falter. I whispered, almost to myself, "We will not be your victims anymore." Then came the moment of choice. Eleanor pushed the ladder just enough for me to swing over fully onto the other side. "Go!" she shouted, her voice fierce in the storm. I jumped, landing hard on the muddy ground, rain instantly soaking me, but free. One by one, the sisters followed. Sarah slipped and screamed, but I caught her hand. Joy's foot caught on a root, and Martha steadied her. Eleanor, last, paused and faced Father Michael for the first time in all these months. Her voice rang out, strong even over the thunder. "You will never control us again." Father Michael's eyes narrowed, fury flashing in the storm's lightning. Then, as if realizing the futility, he stepped back into the shadows, letting us go. We ran. Mud clung to our feet, rain lashed our faces, but each step carried the weight of liberation. The road ahead was dark, uncertain, yet alive with possibility. And somewhere down the twisting path, Mr. Miller's truck waited like a promise. That night, drenched and shivering, 5 women who had been trapped, broken, and silenced for years finally crossed the line between captivity and freedom. But even as we reached the truck, I knew one truth. The nightmare was not over. Freedom was only the first step. The truck's headlights cut through the storm like beacons. Mr. Miller's hands, rough and steady, helped us into the cab. Each of us was drenched, trembling, yet alive. The warmth of the engine and the smell of wet leather was almost surreal after hours of cold rain and fear. We huddled together in the back, shivering, our habits plastered to our skin. Sarah's sobs broke the silence, each tear a release of months of terror. Joy held her tightly, whispering soothing words that sounded foreign coming from someone so broken herself. Martha kept her eyes forward, jaw tight, silent but resolute. Eleanor, always calculating, scanned the road, already planning our next steps even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. Mr. Miller's voice was quiet, calm, almost tender. "You're safe now. As long as you stay with me, no one will find you." Safe. The word sounded alien, but for the first time in months, the sisters dared to breathe. Yet as I looked at their faces, I understood the truth we could not escape. Our freedom was not without cost. We had abandoned the convent, our home, for years. We had broken vows, risked everything, and now carried the invisible scars of abuse, fear, and betrayal. The world outside promised safety, but it also demanded courage we weren't sure we had left. "We did it," I whispered. Her grip was firm, grounding me. "Yes," she replied, "but this is only the beginning." The truck rumbled through winding roads, disappearing into the storm-soaked night. Ahead, the mountains of North Carolina awaited, promising refuge and anonymity. Behind, the convent loomed in memory, its walls filled with horror, its corridors echoing the past we had fled but could never forget. And I realized then that survival was not just about escaping the man who hunted us. It was about carrying our truth, protecting each other, and learning to live in a world that might never understand what we had endured. For the first time in years, I let myself feel hope. But even as the rain washed over us, I knew the storm was far from over. The small inn in the mountains of North Carolina was modest but warm. Its stone walls smelled faintly of wood smoke, and the fire in the hearth crackled as though it had been waiting for us. Mr. Miller's cousin, a wiry man named Henry, welcomed us without questions, offering blankets, dry clothes, and a simple meal. For the first time in weeks, we were allowed to sit without fear. Sarah curled up in a chair, tears drying on her cheeks, staring at the fire like it could burn away the memories. Joy walked the small kitchen, almost robotic, placing cups and plates on the table. Eleanor immediately began organizing our small lives, assigning chores, noting supplies, and planning how to keep us safe. Martha, who had carried so many burdens in silence, finally allowed herself to exhale, shoulders sagging as though decades of weight were lifted for just a moment. I sat by the window, staring at the rain-soaked mountains, and finally allowed myself to feel the enormity of what we had done. We had defied the rules, the authority, the very institution that promised to protect us, and we had survived. But the scars remained. Each sister bore her own. Sarah flinched at sudden movements. Joy started at loud voices. Eleanor could not sleep without checking every lock, and I carried the burden of having led them into danger, knowing that at any moment someone could discover us. Yet in the quiet, a fragile strength began to grow. We began to share our stories with one another, whispering truths that had been buried under fear. Every confession, every trembling word knit us closer. We were no longer just 5 sisters in a convent. We were a unit forged by suffering, bound by the unbreakable will to survive. Mr. Miller came by each day, bringing news, supplies, and quiet encouragement. "You've done what most cannot," he told me one evening. "You've taken your lives back." I nodded, but my eyes were fixed on the mountains. Freedom was ours for now, but the past had a way of following, like a shadow cast long by the storm. And I realized the hardest part wasn't surviving the night. It was learning to live with the knowledge of what had happened, and finding a way to carry our truth into the world without letting it crush us. Weeks passed at the inn, and slowly the storm within us began to settle. The walls that had once enclosed our terror now held warmth, firelight, and the faint smell of bread baking in the kitchen. Sarah began to smile again, hesitant at first, then more freely. She helped Eleanor tend a small herb garden Henry had allowed us to plant outside the window. Joy laughed quietly over small jokes that would have seemed absurd a month ago, her laughter fragile but alive. Martha resumed cooking, her hands steady, kneading dough as though shaping her own resilience with each loaf. Eleanor began writing letters to distant acquaintances, discreetly seeking advice on how to expose the abuses at the convent without endangering the others. I watched them, my heart heavy with relief and sorrow. We had escaped, but the chains of memory lingered. Nightmares came without warning, and shadows in the corners of the inn sometimes made me flinch. But every morning, seeing them breathe, live, and reclaim their essence, I felt the flicker of hope grow into a small, steady flame. Mr. Miller returned with news one afternoon. "There's movement in the church," he said cautiously. "Some officials are finally questioning Father Michael's conduct. Evidence is being gathered. You may not have to hide forever." Hope surged, but it was tempered with fear. Would justice come in time? Could the church truly hold one of its own accountable? And most importantly, Would the world finally hear the truth we had carried in silence for so long? We spoke late into the night, huddled around the fire, whispering vows to one another, never to let fear silence us again, never to forget what had been done, and always to protect one another. The sisters were no longer victims, they were witnesses, warriors in a quiet war against cruelty masked as sanctity. That night, I allowed myself to sleep fully for the first time in decades, the sound of the rain on the roof like a lullaby promising not just survival, but renewal. And in the deep hours before dawn, I whispered to myself a vow that would carry me forward. The world will know. We will make sure of it. Years later, I sit in a sunlit room, the same one where I once wrote secrets in the dark, and I feel the weight of silence lift. The sisters and I, scattered now across towns and cities, have rebuilt our lives, but the memory of that convent of Father Michael remains etched in our souls. The church finally took action. Investigations confirmed what we had known all along. Father Michael was removed from ministry, his authority stripped away, and the shadow he cast over our lives was finally acknowledged. But justice came slowly, painfully, and imperfectly. Some names remained hidden, some voices ignored, but we had done what mattered. We survived, and we told the truth. I remember the moment I shared our story publicly for the first time, my voice shaking, my hands trembling, as cameras and microphones captured decades of pain, fear, and courage. Millions listened. Thousands wrote to us, offering support, sharing their own stories, or expressing outrage. For the first time, our suffering had meaning beyond survival. It became a beacon. And yet there was something deeper than justice or recognition. The bond we had forged in terror had become unbreakable. Eleanor, Martha, Joy, and Sarah, my sisters, remained at my side, not bound by vows or habit, but by choice, love, and shared endurance. I often think back to the night of the storm, to the slippery rope ladder, the jagged glass, the thunder that masked our flight. That night, we crossed from fear into freedom, from silence into voice. Every moment since has been a reclamation of ourselves, a defiance against the darkness that once sought to consume us. Now, at 70 years old, I speak not only as Grace, the nun who fled, but as a witness, a survivor, and a storyteller. I tell our story so that no one forgets, that evil hides behind masks, that courage can flourish even in the darkest places, and that the price of truth is high, but necessary. As I close this chapter of my life, I realize the most profound lesson of all. Freedom is not just an escape. It is the courage to live, to speak, and to shine a light on the shadows, no matter how long they have lingered. We survived the storm, and in doing so, we became unbreakable.